And we're live. Welcome to the Constitutional Roundtable. My name is Andrew, aka the Citizen 1776, and with me, as always, is Douglas V. Gibbs, Mr. Constitution. As you can see, it's just the two of us, and that's all right because
Yeah,
we
poor
are the
hamster has a
original.
date.
Yeah, and hope he has a good date. Dates are always fun.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, he's got a girlfriend, so it's the same person.
yeah,
Bound to work out well.
right. All right, so I guess let's just jump right into it. Anything in particular that you feel like bringing up tonight?
Well, actually, there was a request, if you remember last week, for us to talk about an Article 5 Convention of States.
Yes.
And so, as the chat room populates, we'll get started on that. There are a few news items that have been floating around I think we ought to talk about real quick.
All right.
So I believe last week we brought it up on the show, Brunson v. Adams, the case that writ of certiorari that went to a Supreme Court asking to review the 10th Circuit's decision to dismiss it without prejudice. Now, basically, what the case is about is it's basically going after Congress for refusing to investigate the fraudulent election that's what they're saying anyway, and that's what the case is saying, and so the Supreme Court decided to go ahead and review the case, an individual review on whether or not to even talk about or whatever on January 6th of next year, 2023. Now that said, when they do that, that doesn't mean they necessarily will go any further with it, and it may not even get to their desks, because about 80% of the cases they do that with winds up not being discussed or read. So in other words, they're tabling it for now, and they plan to allegedly look at it on January 6, 2023, but nobody knows for sure if they will actually get to it.
Okay.
The other case, and I'm looking it up right now. It's Harper v. Moore, and Harper v. Moore is also an election related case, and right, Harper v. Moore, is that the right one? Moore v. Harper. I had it backwards. Sorry. Moore v. Harper, which is North Carolina, and the question was: did the local courts and the have the authority to strike down or interfere with the legislature's gerrymandered congressional map? According to the court, the way they did it violated the North Carolina Constitution on whether or not lawmakers should have total control over election rules without any checks and balances. Well, if you read the Constitution, Article 1, Section 4, the state legislature has the authority, control over election rules. However, the check against it, the check and balance, is Congress. If Congress believes that the law was passed is radically excessive, or it is tyrannical or whatever, the Congress may make an alteration or change. Now, this is only regarding congressional elections, Senate and House. Presidential election and local elections, there is no check by Congress. It is completely up to the state legislature. The fear is that if a state legislature is going to act in a manner that's outside what's desired by the people or by the courts, that there needs to be a check. Constitution gives no authority to the courts to be that check. So that's why this case is important. If it does go to the United States Supreme Court, because the North Carolina Supreme Court struck down the map, calling it an egregious and intentional partisan gerrymander. It's a Republican-dominated legislature proposed a second map, again accused of being gerrymandered. And so a state court ordered an expert on the process to draw congressional districts to create a fair map, whether the legislators liked it or not. The legislatures were not pleased, and so they asked the Supreme Court to step in and reinstate their previous map. So that's that case, and we'll be seeing that, and that's a huge case. And we'll be seeing that go to the United States Supreme Court. So we have two election cases, basically, that are up for review by the United States Supreme Court.
Okay. Yeah, I've not been following any of the news as of late. So That is interesting news.
This is all news to you, huh?
Oh yeah. Unfortunately, it's this last couple weeks have been crazy. So, can you hear anything in the background?
Oh, absolutely. I can hear the kids having a great old time.
Oh, wonderful.
All right, that's okay. It's not annoying me if it doesn't annoy the audience.
Well, how about I go somewhere a little bit more quiet? Stand by.
This is the hazard of doing live shows, guys.
Yeah. I'm just going to do it in my normal place here. So,
all right.
Plus, it feels more homey. It feels more original.
Now, for those of you who are viewing the show live, there's a few of you so far. You may participate in the chat. Type something in the chat. I've got a view of the chat on two computer screens. The one that I'm on with the Citizen, and then also one on my main computer where I actually have the YouTube page up, so I can see the other info. Now there's 5 in the room, and so before I get started, I wanted to make sure that we gave a chance for people to get into the show before we really start getting into convention of states. I believe it's something that needs to be talked about. Now that said, while we're waiting a little bit more for the show to populate a little bit, let me mention one other item that needs to be talked about. About 2 weeks ago, the Epic Times, which I respect and typically agree with 100%, published a story that was, for lack of a better way of putting it, very inaccurate and downright dangerous. And yeah, very interesting. And so I want to mention that real quick, talk about it real quick. The title of the article and the date. The date was November 19th, so it's a couple weeks ago. The article title is "The USA Inc. Reporter exposes how America was hijacked, turned into a corporation during Civil War."
Oh, okay.
I am not going to go through the entire article. It takes, as with this conspiracy theory, it takes bits of truth here and there, and then creates something that isn't. And so what I did, real quick, on Political Pistachio, is I wrote a short article, because what had happened was one of my students in one of my Constitution classes, one I have in Orange County out here in Southern California, wrote me about it, sent me the link. I was unaware of this article, even though I do subscribe to the Epic Times. I don't always get a chance to read through everything and all that. And I am going to do a video to address the article line by line. But to give a real quick summary over the issue, I spent a number of debates arguing if the United States is a corporation. And so what I'm going to give here is a general response based on those debates.
Hey, Doug, if I may say real quick, just for clarification for the audience, is this in regards to the 1871 Act.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a part of it.
For those of you who don't know, there's a
I'm going to get into that.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to get into all of that. So,
all right, perfect.
So hang with me for just a second. All right. So the word corporation, first of all, the idea is the United States is a corporation. In fact, usually when I get into the discussions with people about this, they'll say, well, Doug, if the United States is not a corporation, then why is USA Inc. listed in Dun and Bradstreet? USA Inc. is utilities something. I can't something. It's USA Inc. is a telecommunications utilities company. It's not the United States, first of all. Second of all, just because a corporation is listed in, or something is listed in Dun and Bradstreet, does not necessarily mean it's a corporation. There are actually cities and states listed in Dun and Bradstreet. Dun and Bradstreet lists not just corporations, but also entities in which you can invest in. And often cities and states put out bonds and things like that you may invest in, and they may show up on Dun and Bradstreet. That all said, the United States, the theory is the United States is a corporation, and therefore, as a corporation, you are nothing but employees, and so as a citizen, the word citizen now is really subject, and you're a subject to the corporation, like an employee would be, and the only way to really have true freedom is to escape the corporation and become a state, national, or sovereign citizen. And there's additional things that in some of the discussions pop up, such as admiralty courts, admiralty law, and the Vatican, which is one I really get a kick out of, because you're telling me a primarily Protestant country has made a deal to be subservient to the Vatican, and yet even as late as the 60s was freaking out over a Catholic president? Really? But anyway, I digress. So the idea is the United States a corporation? So let's tackle that part by itself. First, the word corporation, like many words in the English language, has a number of meanings. And it did not mean back then a multinational business entity with limited liabilities as it does today. Or at least it didn't mean that, and that wasn't even one of the definitions at the time. The first corporation to truly become an entity of that nature was U.S. Steel, right around 1905. Now, that is not to say that the word corporation wasn't used for business entities. The word corporation was. The East India Trading Company, for example, was considered a corporation. But the word corporation was slightly different in its meaning at the time. Prior to the early 1900s, when U.S. Steel became a quote-unquote our first limited liability corporation, such entities were called trusts. Now, while the word corporation, let me back up. The word corporation has a more general meaning back then, and was more often applied politically than it was to business entities. So the word corporation does indeed appear in the 1871 Organic Act. There's another Organic Act in 1801. The reason they're called Organic Acts is it has to do with Washington, D.C., but in both cases. Both of them were used to monkey with the District of Columbia. And in the case of the 1801 one, the District of Columbia was divided into 2 counties in order to establish additional federal judicial offices. What had happened is the Adams administration had lost his party, the Federalist Party, which was Alexander Hamilton's party, had lost the election to Thomas Jefferson. And they also lost the White House and both houses of Congress. And so in order to retain some type of power, they retreated to the courts. By doing so, they also decided to pack the court system. You've heard pack the court means expand the United States Supreme Court in number. They literally did it with the entire court system.
Oh, wow.
They doubled the number of circuit courts from 3 to 6 at the time. They nearly tripled the number of district courts, and they added a number of other federal positions, such as Justice of the Peace, which was given to William Marbury, who was the person who was involved in that famous Marbury versus Madison case, which we can talk another time about. So what they did is they divided Washington, D.C. into 2 counties, and then in those counties, they assigned federal judicial benches. And when they became counties, those 2 counties inside Washington, D.C., they were called corporations, meaning a political entity that can take care of itself. Now, how I know this is because one of the things that I accessed from the time period is the 1828 Webster's Dictionary. That's the first dictionary of the American version of the English language. Prior to that, they were using the Oxford Dictionary. And if you go but the 1828 Webster's Dictionary is the American dictionary. It's closest to that time period. So if you open up that dictionary, the very beginning of corporation reads as such: a body politic or corporate formed and authorized by law to act as a single person, a society having the capacity of transacting business as an individual. Such corporations are the mayor and aldermen of cities, and then goes on with some other examples. So in other words, it became a county corporation, and in the case of the 1871 Organic Act, Washington, D.C., or the areas around the district, became a municipal corporation. You've heard the term, I'm sure, in your young lives, an incorporated city. And if there's a county area that's not a part of the city, what is it? It's unincorporated. That's the term. A municipal corporation, it becomes incorporated, meaning it is a body politic. It has its own mayor. It has its own council. It's able to make its own decisions. It is a body of its own, rather than being a general area that's dependent on the county or the state or whatever. So that's why they use the word corporation, not because it's a business corporation. In the 1871 Organic Act, the reason why they did that is because in 1862, during the war between the states, Washington, D.C. abolished slavery. Interestingly enough, they abolished slavery after the war started. Just a little interesting tidbit for those of you who think the war was all about slavery. And so many slaves who were escaping from the South and heading north, Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, which surrounds that area, were all still slave states, even though they were part of the North. So what would happen is the slaves would stop at Washington, D.C., because that's where they felt they could be protected, which was fine because the politicians needed people to do the dishes, make their beds, shine their shoes. So it was a great relationship. Right. They needed work. The politicians needed workers. Now, that all said, so now you have this huge population in Washington, D.C., the seat of government, which is not supposed to have a population. And every function of Washington, D.C. is determined by Congress. It doesn't have its own government, only Congress. So if it was the same way today, for example, if a Washington, D.C. needed a new stoplight, Congress would have to approve it. But because they realized that was getting a little ridiculous with all these people living there, they needed to have their own representation. They decided to pass the 1871 Organic Act to make the area around Washington, D.C., the city of Washington, D.C., to incorporate it, to make it a municipal corporation.
By doing that, Doug, if I may ask, is that why I guess there's like, was it a 1 square mile that has the capital and the
well, it's 10 miles each, in a square, right? 10 miles, right. 10 miles, 10 miles, yeah. 10 miles. Okay. That's the actual district. Then around it is the city of Washington, D.C. With the Organic Act of 1871, what happened was the towns of Georgetown and Washington and other areas that belonged to Virginia and Maryland were ceded to the federal government, in other words, given to form this federal city around the seat of government. Washington, D.C. But because it has all this population now, didn't used to, gosh, do you really want Congress to make every single decision, or should they have the ability to vote in their own representatives as a city, have their own mayor, have their own city council, and so on and so forth? So what they did was they incorporated Washington, D.C. They made it a municipal corporation, meaning that it is a body politic that can take care of its own stuff. That's basically what the word corporation means there.
That makes so much more sense than the conspiracy theory or the idea. So,
and the reason why I start with this is because all the other stuff that's attached to the corporation theory, if the very foundation is wrong, then the rest of it can't be accurate either. So I'm attacking the foundation first, which is, are we a corporation? The idea is, well, gosh, Washington, D.C. became a corporation, which in turn makes the United States corporation. And, and this is where Warhamster would be beneficial, but I'll bring this up because he talks about, how people have said, well, gosh, look up on such and such exchange, your birth certificate, because you can sell it for whatever. He's in that industry, and that doesn't exist. He's looked.
Yeah.
He's in the financial industry. That's what he does for a living.
Yeah.
And so he has access to Bloomberg and all this other stuff that we don't have access. And he's done the research, and all of those claims are just not true.
Yeah, now, and I think it was a guy. I forgot what his name was. He did a huge presentation on at some point that I guess during the 2008 housing market disaster, he happened to stumble upon through some rabbit holes that were actually whenever someone's born, they're actually because of maritime, they're dead, and so therefore they're exchanged as money or something with the Vatican. Yeah. It's something really outlandish, and whenever I first heard it, I was like, this is really like upsetting, to hear. But that's the thing, though, is that it's not accurate, and maybe it was created to sound that way to draw people in.
Well, the idea of maritime law and admiralty law kind of cracks me up too, because the attitude is that admiralty law and maritime law is essentially the same thing, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the word admiralty law has nothing to do actually with maritime, even though admirals would be a maritime rank.
Sure.
So maritime law is the law of out to sea. The captain is the boss. He's the judge. He's the justice of the peace. He's everything. And it does give in Article 3 in the Constitution, the federal government has authority over maritime law. But maritime law is only practiced out to sea. As for admiralty law, what admiralty law is, this is something that the British imposed against the United States, because what was happening is during the 1760s and early 1770s, the taxation that was being imposed on the colonists were refusing to pay it. And they were doing things like smuggling in goods from other countries to avoid the tax. And so a court would be held, and the juries, which are of your peers, so it's local colonists, would say, hey, they're not guilty. So what's the British to do when the juries are siding with the criminals who are rejecting paying the tax? So what you do is you get rid of the juries and you have the judges run everything. That's what that's what admiralty law is.
Or so essentially, court. It's like a hearing with it's it's like a hearing.
Yeah. The judge is the boss, and there is no jury. Gotcha. So to argue that we are under admiralty law is false, because while when it comes to local tickets and things like that, you do deal with only the judge. You don't have a jury, but that's not because that is not because we're under admiralty law. It's because those are smaller cases under a certain amount of money. Anytime that the crime or issue is less than a certain amount, Seventh Amendment, it does not require a jury. Now that said, if you really want to have a jury hearing, you can, and you can ask for it. But typically you don't. That doesn't mean we're under admiralty law. It means that
We don't want to waste
In those common law cases, smaller common law cases, no jury is required. But if we were totally under admiralty law, there would be no juries anywhere. No case would have juries.
Right.
Now that said, one of the arguments also is, well, gosh, Doug, then why is the flag in the corner of every courtroom got a fringe on it? That means it's an admiralty court or maritime law.
Right.
No, it doesn't. The fringe on the flag does not mean that. The fringe on the flag, all it is to put it in plain language, the flag's version of being in dress uniform.
Class A's.
What happened was in the 1880s, the Army would march, and they wanted to dress up the flag, in uniform like they were, and so they started putting a yellow fringe on the flag. It was only an Army practice in the beginning. Eventually, it became accepted that in certain dress uniform situations for the flag, it can have the fringe. That doesn't change the flag. It's still an official American flag. It doesn't mean it's not an official American flag. It just means it's all dressed up.
Yeah, I think I looked it up. Yeah, I think I looked that up one time because I don't remember if it was Scott McKay or if I heard Ron talking about it or something.
Yeah, I've had to straighten out a lot of people on this.
But I honestly don't remember finding anything that particularly went to that. Now, the document that I read, I think, did say something about people think this, but it's actually not.
Right.
And I think it was something like decorative. So, which makes sense.
That's exactly what it is. It's decorative. It's basically saying the flag is, well, the reason why I say dress uniform is that's really what it is. It's all dressed up.
Well, here's my question to you, Doug. Here's my question to you is, where do you think this came from? I mean, every conspiracy theory or every or
if you read the symptoms of all this and the symptoms they list in their conspiracy theory, a lot of the symptoms are true. But where they're coming from or what they're truly about, it isn't. And it's a mixture of a lot of historical happenings, or historical like admiralty law. It's a historical thing that the British pulled on us. But when we won the war, and one of these arguments is we never won the war. The British never lost, and they just they just changed the war over to hitting us in a corporatocracy kind of fashion, and there is a little bit of truth to that in the sense that while there was a treaty that gave us our sovereignty and said we won the war, the British at the time really didn't consider it as being us winning the war. We just outlasted their ability to continue to fight because it was getting expensive, and they decided, screw it, threw their hands up, we'll be back. And they were in the War of 1812. But even the War of 1812 wasn't just that. There's more to that story too.
Okay.
There's a lot of things that are attached to this theory, like I said, that have a nugget of truth, but it's a symptom, but it doesn't really play well with what they're claiming. One of the other things I want to mention is the difference between a sovereign citizen, state national, or something like that. The idea is you are a citizen of your state, and your state is a citizen of the Union. That there should not be something called a U.S. citizen, and that the U.S. citizen actually occurred that became a U.S. citizen because of the war between the states and the 14th Amendment citizenship clause, which changed citizenship to force you under the iron thumb of the corporation. Once again, that's not necessarily true. First of all, U.S. citizen did exist going all the way back to the first 7 articles of the Constitution. For example, in Article 2, when it mentions natural-born citizen, because the oldest natural-born citizens at the time were 11 years old,
right,
they had to give the option to for another way to be president, because none of the natural-born citizens were old enough yet. And so it says that you must be a natural-born citizen or a citizen at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. So that tells you right there that U.S. citizen did exist, first of all. Now, they are correct that at one time it was that they consider themselves a citizen of their state, and their state was a member of the Union. Back then, people didn't consider themselves Americans as much as they were a Pennsylvanian or a New Yorker or a Virginian. That part of it is true. There is a nugget of truth there. But that was under the Declaration and under the Articles of Confederation. Once the Constitution was put in play, while people still consider themselves also citizens of their states, becoming a U.S. citizen also became an important thing with the Constitution. So the state national argument basically ended with the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So what they've done is they're claiming that state national today should still be in play, when really it's something that was only in play for about 10
years.
About 10 years.
No, yeah, 10 years. I don't know why I just said 30.
Yeah, well, because the Articles of Confederation, Articles of Confederation were written in 1777. Constitution was written in 1787. It's really actually a little bit more time. 1776 technically is when we became a country, and while the Constitution was written in 1787 and ratified in 1788, it didn't go into effect till 1789. So technically, there's 13 years where state national was actually a thing. But once the Constitution went into play, while it didn't become a firm union in the sense that states could secede if they desired, it was firmer of a union than it was under the Articles, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the idea is we wanted the union to hold together.
Madison, it was more organized.
Yeah, it was more firm than it was under the Articles. That does not mean, though, that it was such a perpetual union that the states could not secede. In fact, right before the War of 1812, 2 states were considering seceding because under the central Bank of the United States, the economy was so bad that a couple of the states were like, hey, we could do a better job running our own economies. We're out of here. But the war disrupted that effort. And the war itself, even. A lot of people don't understand that a part of that was because we were trying to disconnect from Europe. We have the Bank of the United States charter had expired and was not renewed in 1811, plus the missing 13th Amendment, which really disconnected our lawyers from the International Bar Association. So what it did is it disconnected the United States from the banking system and the legal system in Europe. And we're basically saying, hey, no, we're going to go our own way. Screw you guys. And Rothschild, I can't remember his first name at the time, the particular Rothschild, said, hey, if the United States doesn't fix this, they're going to be in a war. 6 months later, we were in the War of 1812. So that's some interesting coincidences. Now, because of the original 13th Amendment, that plays into this conspiracy as well. Because the idea is, gosh, back then, the original 13th Amendment was trying to separate us from the British Accreditation Registry, the Bar Association. Except bar doesn't mean British Accreditation Registry, and it never has. The word bar, and some will even argue, well, it comes from because there was a bar between the judge and the rest of the courtroom. That has been suggested by Blackstone, but that's not even the reason. The word bar comes from barrister. Barristers are lawyers. Now, originally, barristers were prosecutors that served the king. But eventually, the word barrister came to be known as any lawyer. So a bar association is an association of barristers. So that's where it comes from. British Accreditation Registry does not exist. So once again, there's nuggets of truth, but yet it's been twisted into something else. And so the reason why this is so important, the corporation theory and state nationals, the reason why I talk about this stuff and I try to make sure people understand this stuff is not because I'm trying to, destroy your fight or poo-poo something or be mean or what. I'm all about the truth. And first of all, second of all, if people are chasing after this stuff and they're distracted from the real fight that we're fighting, that's a loss of a warrior because they're over there distracted by this stupid theory when they should be helping us get this country turned around. And then as a sovereign national or a state national, what they essentially are doing is while people like me are in the speeding vehicle trying to downshift and hit the brakes and slow things down and change the path of the speeding vehicle that's out of control, they're jumping out of the vehicle. I don't need you to jump out of the vehicle. I need you to help us. And so that's how I see it anyway.
Yeah. So that, I guess, begs the question then, do you think that this was a psyop by the government?
Possibly. I actually have suggested that.
I mean,
because what they're doing is they're poisoning the word citizen. They've decided that the word citizen is no different than a subject. So they're claiming, I don't want to be a citizen. I'm a sovereign national or a sovereign whatever. Well, if you don't want to be a citizen and citizen means nothing, then the globalists have won. What gives us our sovereignty as a country is the fact that it's full of citizens that are a part of that sovereign country. If you have no citizens, then why care whether or not illegal aliens can vote? Why care if there's a border? Because if there's no citizens, there is no sovereignty as a country. The country's sovereignty is very important. Secondly, our sovereignty as individuals is inherent. In other words, God gave it to us. It's like our natural rights. It's not something that we have to gain. We already have it. If government is standing in the way of between us and our sovereignty, then the way to fix it is to fix government, not to run away and leave government or leave the system.
Interesting.
So,
when about do you think all this came?
I don't know, but about the last 2 or 3 years, it's been bubbling more than before. I'm sure it goes back farther. I'm sure these arguments have been around, but I really didn't start coming across them until right before I met Scott McKay. And then when I met Scott, and I was on his show a few times, and then when I got to know a lot of his audience, and this started to bubble up, and then now I'm starting to hear it from students in my classes, and because what's happened is it's really grown. Because see, the problem is, and I shouldn't say problem because I get it. People are looking for something because they know it's all screwed up, and they're looking for answers. And the way the people who support this idea present it, it sounds very authoritative. It sounds like it's got nuggets of truth because it does. But overall, it's a false distraction. Overall, there's no truth to it.
Yeah. Do you think also the fact that it's people like a good like a the old saying, I like a good conspiracy theory? I wonder if that also kind of ties into it.
Yeah, it is. It's so crazy. It just might be true kind of attitude.
Yeah, I guess, and it's exciting. Like, are aliens real? Like,
Yeah. Well, that gets into the Galactic Empire or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, but no, I can't remember what they're calling it, the Galactic something. Oh, the Galactic Federation. That's what it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that one's funny too. But here's the thing. The problem is when someone like me then argues against this, then the assumption is I disagree with everything that's even associated with that. Not necessarily. Like I said, there's some nuggets of truth. The original 13th Amendment did exist. The fear of our lawyers being a part of the international bar was a very real fear. So those truths exist, but not to the point where British Accreditation Registry and corporation theory and all that. I'm sorry, that just there's another one. There's the Treaty of Verona. The Treaty of Verona is another one that pops around every once in a while. I see it every once in a while, and that basically says the Treaty of Verona was between the United States government or the United States corporation and the Vatican and the Bank of London. And so the Bank of London and the Vatican actually owns the United States, and we serve at their pleasure. The problem with the Treaty of Verona is that it never actually existed. In fact, where it comes from is a newspaper created the Treaty of Verona as a conspiracy theory on purpose to sell more newspapers.
Okay.
But it never actually existed.
Well, then that kind of really pokes at the idea of the people sharing it or trying to get more views, more likes, more followers.
But see, they believe it to be true because that newspaper said so. But they don't look. But then when they see the possibility that it might be false, they don't want to break the glass of what they're looking through, their looking glass, so they decide to ignore those warning signs.
Well, do you think they also maybe take those people and maybe, I don't want to say hero worship, but they, it's like they become kind of like this leader of this movement, and then people get so into it that they ignore. It's like that girl that has this.
Well, it's like a cult of personality.
Yeah.
You get the cult kind of thing going. And I get that, and it's unfortunate.
Well, I mean, like, you ignore all the warning signs, and you're just focused on this. But if you really
because the cult is too important, and the reason why all those warning signs are there is because everybody just too jealous. They don't want to believe it. That's kind of the attitude. Now, like I said, I'm not necessarily anti-conspiracy theory per se, but I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy factualist.
Right.
I do believe that there are conspiracies, but I want to see the facts, and I want to know the true story, and I want to know the context, and I'm going to research it, and I have.
Yeah.
And I remember one time I was on a show with Scott's audience, and we're talking about. Matter of fact, I think you were in the chat room. This was with Ron and Warhamster. We were talking about 9/11, and I talked a little bit about 9/11. I spent about half an hour giving my story, and then some of the things I believe. And a couple of people in the chat room was like, "Well, Doug, you need to, get better educated about this. So, you need to do more research." And I said, "No, I've done the research. I just didn't come to the same conclusions you did."
Right.
And my research is, a little different because, and it's partly because being Mr. Constitution, I have connections that a lot of people don't have. And this is something I mentioned, just to give you an example on that show, as a matter of fact, on that particular episode, is because usually when we talk about 9/11, one of the first questions by people who are quote unquote truthers, which I don't totally disagree with them, but I don't totally agree with them. There's you've heard what I've had to say. I've got my own parameters. But the first question usually is, well, how do you explain Building 7? And what they mean by that is Building 7 was taken down on purpose, and there's no way from a casual observation that it could have been knocked down just by debris. Therefore, it must have been demolished purposely. And if it's a purposeful demolition, then that supports, from their point of view, the idea that the entire 9/11 thing was an inside job and that both towers were brought down by demolition. Now, and I'm not going to get into all of those theories because, like I said, I'm not necessarily with the truthers, but I'm not necessarily against them. I'm somewhere in between. That's beside the point. But when it came to Building 7, because I was curious, I said, okay, since that's the question I usually get, let's do some research. And I knew how to research, not by how everybody else researches, but I got in touch with people who were there, who were in the government at the time. I have a friend who was a member of the Department of Defense and was involved in some intelligence stuff, and another friend who was CIA at the time. So who better to ask than those guys? And what I got was that Building 7, when it was built after the first World Trade Center attack, was built with munitions in the walls because Building 7 was to contain gold and confidential paperwork and confidential materials on computers and all this other stuff. And so if ever the World Trade Center was ever attacked again,
get rid of the documents, get rid of the stuff.
You destroy the building. It's already got the munitions in the walls.
That actually makes sense.
And so the people who say, well, Building 7 was taken down on purpose, they're right, but not for the reason that they think.
It was to protect the documents and stuff for America's interest. It's kind of like whenever like those criminals, like whenever the police are about to come in, they hit the switch and all their servers blow up.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense, because if you have something that is, not cynical in any way, it's just classified documents, let's say, of how our tanks are made or how whatever. We don't want that getting in the wrong hands.
Yeah. Well, the difficulty with these types of debates is it becomes a us versus them kind of thing. You're either way over here or way over there.
You're either with us or against us.
Yeah. And usually the answer is somewhere in between. And that's where someone like me comes in. I start to investigate, I start to look into it. And so often when I disagree with a group, they say, oh, well, then you believe that. No, I don't. And it confuses them. Well, how's that possible? Then you must agree with us. It's not an either or.
They're like the cis. They only believe in absolutes.
Yeah, it's funny. I just watched that the other day. But anyway, so that's all of that. Now, in my email, I did promise we're going to talk about convention of states. So let's wrap up the show with that.
Let's do it.
All right. So now, people out there, you've heard of convention of states. You've heard of these ideas of an Article 5 convention, and John Birch Society, Eagle Forum, and a lot of other groups will tell you very dangerous, bad idea, because you might have a runaway convention, and if you have a runaway convention, well, then the corporatists, the power mongers, the people with lots of money and power, they will hijack it and rewrite the Constitution, and then they will finish destroying the country. So now, without getting into too much detail yet, let's do some basics work here. First of all, they don't care about rewriting the Constitution because they're ignoring it just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Number one. Number two, if they want to hijack an Article 5 convention, then why has Soros put billions of dollars into spending to stop the idea of an Article 5 convention? They don't want to hijack it. They're scared to death of it. And here's why. Because an Article 5 convention or a convention of states isn't about rewriting the Constitution. It is not a con, as you may have heard. Con meaning Constitutional Convention. We had only one con, summer of 1787, when we wrote that Constitution. And they say, well, Doug, that was a runaway convention because, it was illegal because it took a unanimous decision to get rid of the Articles of Confederation, and they just tossed it without Rhode Island being there. That's not true. What had happened was all 13 states had agreed to the convention with the understanding that a new constitution may be written, and agreed that it was possible to have to discard the Articles of Confederation. So the agreement had already been made unanimously. So first of all, that argument that it was illegal because it wasn't unanimous is not true. However, when en route to the convention, the Rhode Island delegates decided they didn't want to be a part of it because they were realizing the chance of a new constitution being written was very real, and they didn't want to be a part of such a crazy idea. About the 6th week into the convention, when it became absolutely believed to be absolutely for sure that they were going to write a new constitution, 2 of the delegates from New York walked out, leaving Hamilton by himself to represent New York. So there were fears of this new constitution. Now, that said, here's what an Article 5 convention is. In Article 5 of the United States Constitution, it states that constitutional amendments may be proposed by 2/3 of Congress, each house, agreeing by 2/3 each, or 2/3 of the states gathering and by 2/3 vote proposing an amendment. In both cases, if the amendment's proposed, it goes out to the states for ratification. That ratification can be by state legislatures or by convention of in each state. In a convention, the delegates are chosen by the people. So the rules of convention, which are contrary to what John Birch Society and Eagle Forum says, are very, very detailed in our historical letters and different documents. Not the Declaration of Independence or Constitution per se, but in other documents. Number one, office holders cannot be a delegate. Number two, in a convention, each state gets one vote. So it doesn't matter how many delegates a state has. The vote towards whether or not a proposal can go out to the states is still one per state. And so and then even if the proposal goes out and it's a crazy proposal, it still requires 3/4 of the states to ratify it. So there's a lot of protective mechanisms in place to make sure it's not runaway. So convention of states is the states, rather than the Congress, proposing amendments in a convention. Now, here's what most people don't know. Originally, that was going to be the only way to amend the Constitution. They did not add to the Constitution the allowance of Congress to propose amendments until 4 days before the end of the convention. So originally, Convention of States was going to be the only way the Constitution could be amended originally. Now, that said, also, in my opinion, if you are against Convention of States, you're against Article 5 Convention, what you're basically saying is that you trust Congress to be the only ones to be allowed to propose amendments. Why would you believe that? Shouldn't the states be able to say, screw Congress, we're going to do it? And without a Convention of States, would you ever get something like a life amendment or a repeal of the 17th Amendment? No. The only way those are going to happen is through a Convention of States.
Yeah, it almost feels like that's our last option,
right? And now the problem is the Convention of States supporters believe it's our only option. I believe Convention of States is a good tool, and I believe it can work with nullification, Republic review, and other options that we also have. They work together in unison, in concert with each other. I don't believe that a Convention of States alone is the save-all be-all, but I do believe it's an important tool on our tool belt.
Yeah, I guess the way how I kind of look at it, especially with how many Republic cogs have been removed, I like using that word Republican cogs. Anyway, it's kind of like
and you mean Republican form of government, not Republican Party. I understand. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Is that it's kind of like our broken arrow. Like we've tried all these other things and the enemy's right on top of us, and it's either we do this or it's what else can we be done?
Right.
Let the planes let it drop. That's kind of how it seems like that's how it is right now, because they are ignoring the Constitution. They are, but here's another thing though, is that if we did a Convention of States, how can we? Let's say we did a Convention of States and we decided to do all this stuff. Couldn't Congress just ignore that too?
They could, but I would say probably not, and here's why. Those amendments will be written in modern language, and everybody would be familiar with them because they happen in front of their faces. It'd be awfully hard for them to pull the same crap on those amendments as they do with the older ones. See, the older ones are easy to ignore, because all I got to do is say, oh, well, that's old language and we've interpreted to mean this, and you just don't know because you're not a lawyer.
Yeah.
But these would be in such modern language, the average person go, that's not what it says. It says this. We know so. Yeah. It's our language.
Well, I guess let's go with this thought experiment real quick, just because I'm sure someone would ask it. Let's hypothetically say Convention of States happened, Congress ignored it. What would be? Is there another step?
Or nullification.
Is that the point where
nullification and Republic review. Republic review basically works in concert with nullification. Basically, nullification and Republic review rests on the idea that the state legislatures and the people are the final arbiters of the Constitution, not the judges and not the political class. And therefore, if something's coming out of Washington that's unconstitutional, then the states can say, screw you, that's illegal, we're not going to implement it. Now, to help people understand the importance of nullification and how it could have worked, let's use an example. Obamacare. Obamacare was sued by 24 states, and another lawsuit by 3 states, another one by 1 state. All 3 of the lawsuits got combined, And so it became a lawsuit of 28 states against Obamacare. Worked its way through the federal court system, got to the Supreme Court, and thanks partly to John Roberts, the Obamacare law was deemed constitutional, and those states lost. Now, my first response is this. You're suing the federal government through federal courts with federal judges paid by federal money. How'd you think it was going to turn out? So, what they should have done is all 28 states should have went arm in arm, said, we're nullifying. We're not going to implement Obamacare because it's unconstitutional. We're not going to play the game. We refuse to participate because it's unconstitutional. That's nullification. Had nullification been followed, I think we would have saved a lot of tax dollars, and I think Obamacare would have died. Now, that said, now it goes back to your question about, well, what if Congress is ignoring these new amendments that come out of a convention of states? Then the states nullify. We don't care what you think, federal government. This is the way it's going to happen. But the problem is our critters at the state level don't have the understanding or the cojones to do such. Until the states take back their sovereignty, these problems are going to exist.
Which goes to my next question, because it seems like as patriots, we're split. Some feel like the government's doing a pretty good job. I don't know how many of them are still there, but I'm sure there's some out there.
Oh, I've got a whole bunch of in-laws that think that. Go ahead.
The other half want a French Revolution.
Yeah.
So
keep your powder dry. They're ready to roll.
Yeah.
So, you know what that's going to result in? A lot of dead patriots.
Yeah. And, because, I mean, it seems like more and more these days people are quoting.
Well, I mean, I get it. One of my favorite bumper stickers out there says
the Tree of Liberty.
No. My favorite, it says the founders would be shooting by now. It's a great bumper sticker because it's right. But here's the thing. Okay, fine. Is it going to go to that? How do you run it? How is it organized? How are you going to hit them? Who are you going to contact with? What system are we going to use to be in communication with? Are we all ham operators? Is that how we're going to do it? I mean, there's too many questions. We're not organized enough for something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that said, it's amazing how organized rebels get when pushed up against the wall. So if all hell broke loose, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe the French Revolution guys are onto something. I don't know. But right now, what's our best bet is to go through the processes.
Well, I think the biggest issue is everybody's ready to start shooting, but not. The reason why I brought up the French Revolution is because what happened? They overthrew everything, but then it basically became another nightmare right after because no one knew what to do. The reason why our founding fathers were so successful is because they played it humble the whole time. They petitioned. They did literally everything that they could do.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't just that, but also there's two other factors that were different between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. The French Revolution was about secularism. The U.S. Revolution, the American Revolution, was about Christianity, a godly foundation. So first of all, the French removed God from the whole thing. Secondly, the American Revolution was about individualism, and the French Revolution was about collectivism. So basically what happens is if you include God and you base it on individualism, you get the American Revolution. You remove God and you remove individualism, you get the French Revolution. That's why I teach it to my classes. I think those are two very key reasons. But you're right. If you just go half-cocked, you have your revolution, and then you take over, then what? See, part of the problem is because they rejected God and because they rejected the individual-centric type of system, is they didn't know what to put into place. Because all they knew was what they knew, so they put in place something similar, and it was a disaster. And what they wound up with was another dictatorship and a succession of Napoleons, of dictators. So, and in America, they're like, we're not going to do that. We don't want to be like them. We have thought this out. We've got natural rights, natural law, God-centered system that's based on individualism and a free market. So we're going to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes. That's why it was successful. So that's why I tell people, wherever we're headed, whether it's a revolution or a peaceful takeover or 100 years of darkness, we better get ourselves educated first. We better know and understand what we're fighting for and understand how the system's supposed to work. If we know how the system's supposed to work, we're going to implement something that's going to work. So that's why I do the Constitution classes. Education is the first step towards activism.
Yeah.
What good is activism if you don't know what the hell you're doing?
Right. There's been a lot of protests where people prove the point of, hey, like it's like guns need to go away, and then you talk to the people and they have no idea what they're there for. They're just holding signs. Like, is that what you're basically saying? Like, as far as the activism?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and in the case of the left, also the problem is they have lost critical thinking skills. Critical thinking involves context, logic, and considering what the consequences will be down the road, looking at the conclusions down the road. What happens next if you implement what you want to implement?
Yeah.
So critical thinking is key here.
Yeah. Well, here's the one thing that I think that the liberals do have something going for them is when they want something done, they sure know how to come together and unite with one another.
Well, it's because they're naturally Borgish, and they're naturally the hive mind.
Though, like that, but you get what I'm saying, though. It's people are always like, how come the Democrats are so successful? It's because they have a mission and they all get together. That's what we need to do. Whenever the Republicans to have a majority, what do? Nothing. When Democrats get in there, man, they try to pound that stuff through like there's no tomorrow. They're like, I'm gonna stick this needle in a smaller hole and it's gonna work. Like it's, it may not work, but we're gonna try and we're gonna keep hitting it. Like with Trump, they did one impeachment. They try to hit him with another one. I bet you if they would be doing it every day. What do? We complain, but we do nothing about it. So here's a question I have for you.
I wonder. Okay, go ahead.
I think it's important that we need to be encouraged because with a lot of the people in our area, it's all doom and gloom. Oh, they got everything rigged. There's no hope. Can you get everybody away from the ledge, Doug? Give us some.
I am roping people and grabbing them and pulling them back away from the ledge. Notice, by the way, I know how to do it. Yes, I used to. When I was in my 30s, I rode bulls and I could rope a calf. That's beside the point. But I was a rocker. Figure that one out. Okay, so here's how you rope them and bring them back from the ledge. Is first of all, you get them to understand that it's not hopeless. They want you to feel hopeless. They want you to think that there's no hope. It's not hopeless. And there is a way, but it begins with us coming together and it begins with us getting our culture back. See, our problem is we keep focusing on the political system, and that's all we've talked about tonight. But in order to get our political system back, we have to first get our culture back. And how do we get our culture back? Do we force people to go to church? No. We serve as an example. We start preaching the word because the truth always wins.
Mm-hmm.
The truth shall set you free, right?
Yep.
That's what happened in the colonies. You go all the way back to 1734 when Jonathan Edwards started preaching, because in 1662, the churches in Massachusetts and in the colonies began to preach what's called a halfway covenant. If you're only halfway good with God, that's okay. You're good. And of course, society went to crap. And Jonathan Edwards got the church involved again. And he said, hey, if we don't have a biblical foundation, we're done. And he started to preach that. And his message began to resonate, and it created a revival and ultimately the Great Awakening. And the reason why that's important is How are you going to know if something's wrong if your culture is not right? The way I like to explain that is, what's the best way to spot a counterfeit bill? Because you're used to handling a mixture of counterfeits and the real thing, or because you handle the real thing all the time? If you handle the real thing all the time, when the counterfeit comes across your hands, it's obvious immediately. I used to handle money. I worked for a credit union for like 4 years. I know this to be true. Same thing with your culture. If your culture is right, you'll recognize wrong easier and faster. We have a society who's mixed up in the middle of the real thing and the counterfeit, and they don't know the difference. And whose fault is it? Us as Christians, because we've allowed the culture to take a wrong turn. And the way to get the culture to make the right turn is not through authoritarianism, it's not through theocracy, it's through example.
Yep. I would definitely agree with that. Sometimes actions is louder than words. So,
and the other thing that I want the audience to understand when we talk about coming back from the ledge, it's not a quick process. We're not going to get instant gratification. I know we live in a society with, these stupid things, right? And we want our instant gratification because, I'll look it up. I got my phone. I can look it up. We have our instant gratification, right? Or our computers or whatever. There is no instant gratification here. We can't flip a switch and fix America. It's a process. And chances are, even as young as you are, you youngster, you young whippersnapper, our generation is not going to see it repaired. It's going to be a future generation. So that means we need to work our asses off, and we need to be teaching who we can, the best we can, the younger generation, so they can carry on that fight so that it can come to its better conclusion and get turned around. But it's a process. Tracy says, Siri, how do we fix America? Yeah.
Well,
I'm wondering what the answer would be.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, so with you saying that, that kind of reminds me of a speech that you once gave on the constitutional class, and it was very moving. And I have the video up on my channel. It was your speech of "They did it for you," and that's something that we need to take that on. And yeah, having all the sayings and for being able to quote Thomas Jefferson is wonderful, but at the end of the day, we need to focus on the future and on the future generations, because if we don't do that, everything's in vain.
How do we fix it? You begin locally and you decentralize the machine. That's it. But of course, that's the simple version. There's more to it than that, but that's ultimately what it is. And Chris says, what's been happening now has been coming since the 60s. Yeah, when they outlawed prayer in school, that kind of stuff. So yeah, now that said, I am a firm believer that in the end, liberty always wins. It may not win quickly, but it always wins. And and like I tell people, even if we lost and I was the last person in America that believed in liberty, I would still stand firm and fight for it, because it's also the right thing to do. Now, when it comes to what you were talking about, my speech from the class, what spurned that on was the preamble. In the preamble, it says, and matter of fact, let me grab a pocket constitution. I'll read it to you directly. Secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Of course, I said it without reading it, but I got this stuff so in my head, I swear. All right, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution. Where it says ourselves and our posterity, if you're looking at your pocket constitution or your bigger book constitution or whatever you have, notice that the word ourselves is lowercase and the word posterity is capitalized. So for those of you who have heard that the founding fathers just did it for themselves and their own power and their riches, that's not what they're saying. See, they capitalized for emphasis. And the word capitalized there is posterity, not ourselves. Posterity meaning those not yet born, the future generation. So in other words, what they're saying is to secure the blessings of liberty, yeah, to ourselves, little o, but especially to our posterity, those not yet born. In other words, while they did do it partially for them, their primary reason was for you. They signed that document for you. They put on the line their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor. They fought a war. They lost their homes. They lost family members, and in some cases lost their lives for you. Question is, do we have that same kind of temerity? Do we have that same kind of faith in the system, in liberty, and the future? Are we willing to do whatever is necessary? Now, I'm not trying to get back into that keep your powder dry group again, but if that is what it takes, if that's what happens someday, so be it. I'm ready for that too. But I'm a firm believer that we can do it by appealing to heaven and by going through the processes of educating, equipping, and arming and motivating our allies. But if we're not trained and equipped, we can't do it. How do we get trained and equipped to fight a war? Because like when I got in the Navy, I didn't just sign the papers. They stuck me on a ship and they said, okay, figure it out. No, I went to boot camp first. First of all, I had to learn the military stuff. And then after boot camp, they sent me to day school so I could learn my rate. And then they sent me to another school so that I could be taught some other stuff I needed to know. Then they sent me to my ship. And then did I do my job immediately? No. I had to do the mess decks and I had to do underway watches and all kinds of other crazy stuff before I even got to do what my rating was. Why? Because I had to be trained. I had to be equipped. I had to go through the process of being able to fight that fight. And then eventually, right about the time I was becoming a petty officer, I really got it. And I was an efficient sailor and I was able to do my job and a lot of other jobs in the manner that was necessary. And I could handle damage control and I could handle general quarters when it was called up. And I was a flight deck guy and so on and so forth. But I had to go through that process. We have to go through the process. We have a lot of people going, bring it on. I'm ready. Let's shoot the plane, like Yosemite Sam or something. We need to be equipped. We need to be trained. We need to be informed. We need to understand. That's part of the reason why I do these classes, because we need to understand this. If we don't understand the Constitution, we'll be like the French Revolution, to bring that up again. You win, and then now what? And then you end up implementing something that's just as bad or worse because you don't know any better. We better understand. We better know. And we better train up the next generation. We better equip them as well.
Doug, I'm not going to lie. Whenever you went through that speech again, it was literally almost word for word. And I remember it because it had such an impression on me. And I literally have chills right now whenever you give that speech. And I think it's important. And I want to emphasize greatly on what you said, because I don't think people really let that sink in. Everyone in the chat, Chris, Bert, Tracy, let that sink in what he said. What the founding fathers displayed is a love, not just for their country, but for us.
The future generations. And like I tell people, I got 7 grandkids. Yeah, I do this for me, but I especially do it for them.
The Bible says there's no greater love than a man that lays down his life for his friends. What they did, even the ones that did not die, they were willing to give up everything at all costs.
Yep.
For you.
Yep.
And that's a love that we need to focus on. Instead of focusing about us, make us the little o and make our children and our grandchildren the main focus. Because when we do that, we're also being servants, and not in a slavery sense, but we're serving others, which is, I believe, that the Lord would bless, because we're no longer being selfish, but we're focusing on taking care of the ones that He loves.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that honestly and genuinely, He will bless it. So
now that said, as a Christian, I put it in God's hands. I know it's His will. But I also understand Louis Gohmert's quote, and it's one of my favorite quotes. You've probably heard me say it before, Andrew. The audience that hasn't, listen carefully. Louis Gohmert, congressman from Texas, said this: "Putting it in God's hands does not mean leaning on the shovel and waiting for the hole to dig itself."
Yeah.
So while it is in God's hands, and I'm a Christian and I believe God's got this, I also believe I got to grab a shovel.
I got a fun little story for that. They'll add to that, and we could close on this.
Okay.
All right. I have guns. I'm not gonna tell you how many. I'm not gonna tell you what kind, and I'm very proficient.
Or
right?
where they're at.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I'm very proficient. I've spent a lot of time on my craft. Let's just say if something broke out, I would be okay. But anyway, a lot of people look at that as, well, you're a Christian, that you're not trusting the Lord because of these guns. That's not true. The Lord gave me these guns to protect the ones he loves, which is me and my family. And I give the example of this person who's out, let's say they're in Hurricane Katrina, the aftermath, everything's flooded, and they're like, Lord, save me, please save me, and this helicopter comes, and he's like,
Yeah,
no,
they're waiting for a miracle. Lord. Yeah, they're waiting for a miracle.
And I'm waiting for the Lord. And then this boat comes, and they wave them off like, no, I'm waiting for the Lord. That person ends up dying, and then he goes to heaven. He goes, Lord, I prayed and I asked, and you didn't help me. He said, I sent you a helicopter and I sent you a boat.
What else did you want?
At some point, you have to take the steps and walk through the door. I only can open it. Well, he can do more than that, but you get what I'm saying. Like, he opened the door.
We have to recognize his will, but we do have to do our part, as Chris said in the chat, and that's exactly right.
It's the same thing with salvation.
It's important.
It's the same thing with salvation. If someone goes to hell, the Lord did not send them there; they sent themselves. He sent his son to die.
Right.
And you have to initiate that. You have to come to that realization that you're a sinner and that you need to be saved. You need to you need to ask for forgiveness. You need to ask Jesus to save you.
And what a great witness as a Christian to stand firm on liberty and your faith when things look the most dire.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? The Great Commission means we're supposed to bring others to Christ and share the gospel, right?
Yep.
How can you do that if you're not in the public square? You need to be in the public square. And guess what else is in the public square? All this other stuff. So we need to participate.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd say let's go ahead and wrap this up. This was an amazing end. I really liked how that went.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well,
eat your heart out, war hamster. No, I'm sad he wasn't here, but he I'm sure will watch this later and be very proud of us.
Right.
And for those of you who are watching this live or watching later, thanks for participating. Thanks for watching it, and be aware that we try to do this every Friday night, 5:30 or 5:30 ish, depending. I think we were like 5:34 and a half tonight when we got rolling, but be aware, if you enjoyed this, we're here every week. So just put it on your calendar, Fridays, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, or whatever it is back east in right coast time. But it's 5:30 out here, and we're on for an hour and a half. Typically,
I've been trying to keep it an hour.
Yeah, usually it's 2 or 3 of us. If ever Andrew has to do it on his own, God help him. But
what are you trying to say there, Doug?
Yeah. Hey, I'm just saying there's a lot of sharks out there, and I've got the harpoon. Okay.
Well,
no, I appreciate you. I appreciate the fact that you're doing this, man. I got kind of a kick out of, if you go to Political Pistachio, folks, politicalpistachio.com, my blog, I put up. I had fun with this. I have a 4-episode thing that I do over the weekend, and I just got to realizing it. So Fridays at 5:30 p.m. Pacific, Citizen 1776. Saturday at 1 p.m. Pacific, Constitution Radio. Saturday at 9 p.m. Pacific, Mr. Constitution Hour. And then on Sundays at 5, I'm with Alan Myers on For the Republic. So I actually have a pretty cool weekend. I got 4 very cool episodes. So, tune in every week here, but check out the other ones too. And then, of course, Andrew, you have anything else to say before I close us out?
Well, you kind of took my job a little bit, but that's okay. That's all right. I will reiterate. Every Friday night, unless we say so, we will say usually the week before if we're gonna have a show or not. But every Friday night at 8:30 Eastern.
Oh, is that what it is back there? Oh, okay.
5:30 Pacific. Years ago, I never understood what my mom said back east. I was like, what does that mean? But now I understand. But anyway,
now that you're back east.
Yeah, she's from California, so But anyway, follow us.
And people are done. There's conservatives and constitutionalists out in California. When they find out I'm from California, they're like, really? They figure there's just nothing but Hollywood liberals and illegal aliens out here. But there's a few
regular
of us.
And regular aliens.
Yeah, there's like 6 million registered Republicans and probably more conservatives out here.
Yeah. Hey, Doug, where can they find you?
DouglasVGibbs.com, politicalpistachio.com, and right here on Friday nights.
And don't forget Twitter.
And well, there's Twitter, Douglas V. Gibbs. There's Instagram, Douglas V. Gibbs. Facebook, Douglas V. Gibbs. Matter of fact, just about anywhere you're looking for, that's typically the keyword, Douglas V. Gibbs, my name. Right. And I'll also be aware that I'm an author of eight books. So you're looking for a good Christmas present. My books are out there. Amazon or douglasvgibbs.com/store. And appreciate you guys. Appreciate those of you who listen. The plan is to build this not because I want to get bigger, I do, but because more people need to understand these messages. More people need to understand the importance of what we talk about. And I really do believe that most of the normies out there aren't getting it. And we need to reach as many people as possible.
Yes, indeed. Please invite your friends. Even if you got to bribe them, it's fine. It's okay. We'll be all right with it. But no, invite your friends. The thing about this show is that, for one, it's not speculation, conspiracy theories all the time. And we will call it out when it is. Hey, this is a theory of sorts, or this is a speculation. But we try to keep everything based in facts and evidence.
Right.
And the importance of that is that we're not going down anything crazy. We're giving you information that will open your eyes, but also equip you with the tools that you need in order to fight the good fight. And you can't
I couldn't have said it better myself.
And you can't do that with pixie dust and fairies.
That's true.
With actual hard evidence. So that's what you get with this show, and that's how you'll continue to get with it. And we are not going to change. And if you want to find all the conspiracy theory stuff, well, there's plenty of people out there that have it, and good luck to you. But we really want to grow this to have more people involved, and not necessarily make a movement, but a revival.
There you go.
That's very important. But anyway, let's go ahead and sign off, Doug.
All right. United we stand. Combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. We'll see you next week.